What if I told you that your biggest fear isn't spiders, heights, or public speaking? What if the thing that's been secretly running your life, making your decisions, and holding you back is written in the stars? Right now, as you're watching this, there's a deep-seated terror buried in your psyche that's been pulling your strings since the day you were born. And most people will go their entire lives without ever recognizing it. I'm about to reveal the hidden fear that controls every single zodiac sign, and when you hear yours, it's going to hit you like a lightning bolt. You'll suddenly understand why you do the things you do, why certain situations make you feel physically sick, and why some of your biggest life decisions have been driven by this invisible puppet master. But here's the really wild part. Once you know what it is, you can finally start fighting back. So grab something to drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into the psychological underbelly of astrology that nobody talks about. Before we jump in, I want you to think about the last time you made a decision that surprised even yourself. Maybe you turned down a job opportunity, ended a relationship, or avoided trying something new. What was really behind that choice? Was it logic, intuition, or was it something darker, something you couldn't quite put your finger on? The truth is, we're all walking around with these invisible fears that shape our reality. They're not the obvious ones we can name and face head-on. These are the sneaky, subconscious terrors that whisper in our ears when we're about to take risks, when we're falling in love, or when we're standing at the crossroads of change. And here's what's fascinating. These fears aren't random. They're deeply connected to the core energy of your zodiac sign. The same traits that make you uniquely you also create very specific vulnerabilities. It's like each sign comes with its own built-in kryptonite. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This is just astrology nonsense. But stick with me here, because what we're really talking about is psychology. Carl Jung, one of the most respected psychologists in history, believed that we all have shadow selves, parts of our personality that we hide even from ourselves. What I'm about to show you is how these shadow fears manifest differently based on your astrological blueprint. Let's start with Aries, and right off the bat, we're going deep. If you're an Aries, your hidden fear isn't failure. That's too obvious. Your real terror is being forgotten, becoming irrelevant, fading into the background noise of life. Think about it. Aries are natural leaders, pioneers, the first ones to charge into battle. But what happens when the battle is over? What happens when someone else takes the spotlight? This fear runs so deep that it affects everything you do. You interrupt people in conversations, not because you're rude, but because you're terrified that if you don't speak up right now, your voice won't matter. You take on leadership roles even when you're exhausted, because stepping back feels like disappearing. You sometimes create drama or conflict, not because you enjoy it, but because negative attention feels safer than no attention at all. I knew an Aries who turned down a perfect job because it was at a small company where nobody would know her name. She took a worse position at a bigger corporation instead, and she was miserable for years. But in her mind, being unhappy and visible was better than being content and invisible. This fear shows up in your relationships too. You might pick fights with your partner, not because you want to argue, but because engagement, even negative engagement, proves you matter to them. The silent treatment is your worst nightmare because it feels like erasure. Here's the thing though, your fear of being forgotten is actually preventing you from creating anything truly memorable. When you're constantly performing for attention, you're not being authentic, and authenticity is what people actually remember. The real you, not the show you put on, is what makes a lasting impact. The path forward for Aries isn't about getting more attention, it's about becoming comfortable with moments of quiet. Practice sitting in silence without feeling the need to fill it. Trust that your impact doesn't require constant validation. Some of the most unforgettable people in history were those who knew when to speak and when to listen. Now let's talk about Taurus, the sign that everyone thinks is just stubborn. But stubbornness is just the surface. What's really happening underneath is a bone-deep terror of unpredictability, of having the rug pulled out from under your feet. You see, Taurus energy is all about security, stability, building something solid and lasting. But this means that uncertainty doesn't just make you uncomfortable, it makes you feel like you're dying. Your nervous system literally can't handle not knowing what comes next. This fear controls your life in ways you probably don't even realize. You stay in jobs you hate because at least you know what to expect. You avoid trying new restaurants because what if you don't like the food? You might even stay in relationships that aren't working because the devil you know feels safer than the angel you don't. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your fear of unpredictability is so strong that you'll actually create problems just to have something predictable to deal with. I've seen Taurus individuals unconsciously sabotage good situations because things were going too well, and that felt scary and unsustainable. You know that feeling when everything in your life is actually going great, but you can't relax because you're waiting for the other shoe to drop? That's your hidden fear talking. You trust struggle more than you trust ease, because at least struggle is familiar. This shows up in your spending habits too. You either hoard money obsessively because it feels like security, or you spend impulsively on things that make you feel grounded. Expensive sheets, good food, anything that creates a sense of stability. But neither extreme actually addresses the underlying fear. The truth is, life is inherently unpredictable, and your attempts to control everything are exhausting you. Instead of trying to eliminate uncertainty, you need to learn how to surf it. Start small. Order something different at your usual restaurant. Take a different route home from work. Practice tiny doses of unpredictability so your nervous system can learn that uncertainty doesn't equal danger. Your real security doesn't come from controlling your environment. It comes from trusting your ability to handle whatever comes your way. And Taurus, you're way more adaptable than you give yourself credit for. Gemini, this one might hurt a little, so take a deep breath. Your hidden fear isn't commitment or being tied down. Those are just symptoms. Your real terror is being truly known by another person, having someone see all of your contradictions and complexity and decide you're too much. You're the social butterfly, the conversationalist, the one with a million interests and stories. But here's what most people don't realize. All of that external activity is a beautiful distraction from your internal chaos. You keep moving, keep talking, keep exploring, because if you slow down long enough, someone might actually see who you really are underneath all the performance. And who you really are is complicated. You're not one thing, you're 12 things, sometimes all at once. You can be incredibly deep and hilariously shallow in the same conversation. You can love someone desperately and need space from them immediately after. You contain multitudes, and that feels dangerous. So you stay surface level in most relationships. You're charming, entertaining, always ready with a witty comment or an interesting story. But real intimacy? That requires showing someone your contradictions, your confusion, your moments of not knowing who you are or what you want. And what if they can't handle it? This fear makes you a master of deflection. When conversations get too deep, you change the subject. When someone asks you how you're really feeling, you make a joke. When someone tries to pin you down on your true opinion about something important, you suddenly see both sides so clearly that you can't choose. But here's what's tragic about this. The very thing you're afraid of is exactly what would set you free. Being truly known, contradictions and all, is the greatest gift you can give yourself and others. Your complexity isn't a bug, it's a feature. The right people won't be overwhelmed by your multifaceted nature, they'll be fascinated by it. Start practicing radical honesty in small doses. When someone asks you how you are, actually tell them instead of deflecting with humor. Share an opinion that might be unpopular. Let someone see you in a moment of confusion or uncertainty. You'll discover that the people worth keeping in your life aren't looking for you to be simple. They're looking for you to be real. Cancer, let's talk about the fear that's been running your emotional life since childhood. The terror of being emotionally abandoned by the people you love most. This isn't just about people leaving physically, though that's part of it. This is about the deeper fear that when people see your true emotional needs, they'll decide you're too much and withdraw their love. You're the natural caregiver, the nurturer, the one everyone comes to when they need emotional support. But here's the painful irony. While you're taking care of everyone else's emotional needs, you're terrified to express your own. Because what if they can't handle your depth? What if your sadness is too heavy, your need for reassurance too frequent, your love too intense? So you become the emotional giver, but never the receiver. You notice everyone else's moods, remember their important dates, show up when they need you. But when you need the same support, you either don't ask for it, or you ask in such subtle ways that people miss your signals entirely. Then you feel hurt and abandoned, which confirms your worst fear. This fear makes you incredibly sensitive to emotional withdrawal from others. If someone takes a little longer to text you back, you immediately start wondering what you did wrong. If someone seems distracted during a conversation, you assume it's because you're boring them. If someone needs space, you interpret it as rejection. But here's the really destructive part. This fear often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your anxiety about abandonment can make you clingy, which pushes people away. Or it can make you test people constantly to see if they'll stick around, which exhausts them. Or it can make you retreat preemptively to avoid the pain of potential rejection. I've known Cancer individuals who've ended relationships the moment they started getting serious because the vulnerability felt too dangerous. Better to be the one who leaves than risk being left, right? But this strategy leaves you emotionally isolated and confirms your belief that deep connection isn't safe. The truth is, your emotional depth isn't a flaw to be hidden, it's your superpower. The world needs people who feel deeply, who notice the emotional undercurrents that others miss, who can hold space for difficult feelings. But you can't do this healing work for others while being afraid of your own emotional needs. Practice asking for what you need emotionally, even in small ways. Let someone comfort you when you're sad. Express appreciation when you need it instead of waiting for others to guess. Trust that the right people won't be overwhelmed by your emotional reality. They'll be grateful for your authenticity.
Leo, your hidden fear is going to sting because it's the opposite of everything you project to the world. While everyone sees your confidence, your charisma, your natural ability to command attention, what they don't see is your secret terror of being ordinary, forgettable, just another face in the crowd. This fear is different from Aries' fear of being forgotten. For Aries, it's about relevance. For you, it's about specialness. You don't just want to be remembered, you want to be celebrated, admired, seen as unique and extraordinary. The thought of being average keeps you up at night. This fear drives you to constantly perform, even when you're exhausted. You feel pressure to always be on, to always be the most interesting person in the room, to always have the best stories, the most dramatic experiences, the most impressive achievements. But this performance is exhausting, and underneath it, you're terrified that without the show, there's nothing special about you at all. You know that feeling when you're in a group and someone else is getting all the attention? It's not jealousy exactly, it's panic. Because if you're not the center of attention, if you're not the most captivating person present, then what are you? Just ordinary? Just like everyone else. This fear shows up in your relationships in complicated ways. You need partners who make you feel special, but you also compete with them. You want friends who appreciate your uniqueness, but you struggle when they shine brighter than you do. You love being admired, but you're never quite sure if people love you or love your performance. The most painful part is that your fear of being ordinary prevents you from experiencing genuine connection. When you're always performing, always trying to be the most fascinating version of yourself, people fall in love with your highlight reel, not your reality. And deep down you know this, which makes the whole cycle even more terrifying. But here's what you need to understand. Your ordinariness is actually what makes you extraordinary. Your vulnerable moments, your quiet thoughts, your simple pleasures, your everyday struggles, this is where your real magic lives. The Leo who admits they're having a bad day is infinitely more attractive than the Leo who pretends everything is always amazing. Start practicing being ordinary in small doses. Share something mundane about your day. Admit when you don't know something. Let someone else have the spotlight without feeling threatened. You'll discover that people don't love you less when you're human, they love you more. Virgo, Let's talk about the fear that's been driving your perfectionism since you were old enough to critique your own crayon drawings. The deep, persistent terror that no matter how hard you try, you're simply not enough. Not smart enough, not organized enough, not helpful enough, not worthy enough. Everyone sees your attention to detail, your reliability, your ability to spot problems and fix them, but what they don't see is the constant internal critic that never lets you rest. The voice that tells you that everything you do could be better, and better is the minimum acceptable standard. This fear makes you work twice as hard as everyone else, not because you love the work, but because you're trying to earn your right to exist. You believe that your value comes from what you contribute. So you contribute constantly. You fix other people's problems, anticipate their needs, catch their mistakes, all in a desperate attempt to prove that you deserve love and respect. But here's the cruel irony. Your fear of not being enough means that nothing you accomplish ever feels like enough. You finish a project and immediately see its flaws. You help someone and worry you didn't do enough. You receive a compliment and focus on what you could have done better. You're running on a treadmill that never stops, chasing a sense of worthiness that always stays just out of reach. This fear shows up in your relationships as people-pleasing and self-sacrifice. You say yes when you want to say no, because disappointing someone would confirm your worst fear about yourself. You give and give and give, but you're terrible at receiving because being helped feels like admitting you're inadequate. You also struggle with criticism, not because you can't handle it intellectually, but because it feels like confirmation of your deepest fear. Someone pointing out a mistake doesn't just mean you made an error, it means you are an error. This makes you defensive, or worse, makes you shut down completely. The most heartbreaking part is that your fear of not being enough prevents you from celebrating your very real accomplishments. You're probably incredibly competent, reliable, and helpful, but you can't see it because you're too focused on what's missing, what's wrong, what could be better. Here's the truth that might change everything for you. You were enough before you did anything to prove it. Your worth isn't contingent on your performance. It's not something you earn, it's something you are. The voice telling you you're not enough is lying, and it's time to stop believing it. Start practicing self-compassion like your life depends on it, because it does. When you make a mistake, talk to yourself like you would a good friend. Celebrate your wins, even the small ones. Accept help from others without feeling like it makes you inadequate. You are already enough exactly as you are. Libra, let's talk about the fear that's been controlling your relationships and decisions for your entire life. You're terrified both of conflict and of being abandoned, and these two fears feed each other in a vicious cycle that keeps you trapped in patterns that don't serve you. On the surface, you're the diplomat, the peacemaker, the one who can see all sides of every situation. But underneath that balanced exterior is someone who would rather agree with something they disagree with than risk upsetting the harmony. You've convinced yourself that this makes you easygoing, but really you're walking on eggshells in your own life. Your fear of conflict isn't just about avoiding arguments, it's about avoiding any situation where someone might be unhappy with you. You change your opinions based on who you're talking to. You hide your true preferences to keep others comfortable. You smile and nod when you want to speak up. Because what if standing up for yourself makes people angry? What if they leave? And that's where the second fear kicks in, the terror of abandonment. You've learned that being agreeable keeps people around, so you've made agreeableness your survival strategy. But this creates relationships where people love your accommodating nature without ever really knowing who you are underneath all that people-pleasing. This shows up in devastating ways. You stay in friendships that drain you because ending them would require difficult conversations. You remain in romantic relationships that don't fulfill you because breaking up involves hurting someone and you can't handle being the cause of someone else's pain. You bite your tongue in situations where you should speak up because making waves feels more dangerous than drowning quietly. And the worst part is that your fear of conflict actually creates more problems than it solves. When you don't express your needs, resentment builds up. When you don't set boundaries, people walk all over you. When you don't have difficult conversations early on, they become explosive later. Your peacekeeping actually creates the very chaos you're trying to avoid. And here's the really painful truth. Your fear of abandonment often becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you're so focused on keeping everyone happy that you never show up authentically, people don't fall in love with the real you. They fall in love with your agreeableness.
And then when you occasionally do express a strong opinion or need something for yourself, they're surprised and sometimes disappointed because it doesn't match their image of you. The path forward requires accepting that some conflict is not only inevitable, but healthy. Disagreement doesn't equal disaster. People worth keeping in your life won't abandon you for having opinions, needs, and boundaries. In fact, they'll respect you more for being authentic, even if it's occasionally inconvenient for them.
Scorpio. Let's go straight to the heart of darkness, because that's where you live anyway. Your hidden fear is betrayal. Not just the surface-level betrayal of infidelity or broken promises, but the soul-crushing betrayal that comes when you've shown someone your deepest, darkest truths and they use that vulnerability against you. You're the sign associated with depth, intensity, and transformation. But what people don't understand is that your depth comes from a place of profound caution. You go deep because you're constantly scanning for threats, looking for signs that someone is going to hurt you in the places where you're most tender. This fear makes you incredibly selective about who gets access to the real you. You have layers and layers of protection, walls, tests, careful observations. You watch people for months or even years before deciding they're safe enough for real intimacy. And even then, you reveal yourself in small doses, always ready to slam the door shut if you sense danger. But here's where it gets complicated. Your fear of betrayal often leads you to test people in ways that actually push them away. You create situations to see if they'll stick around when things get difficult. You withdraw affection to see if they'll fight for you. You sometimes reveal your worst traits early on to see if they'll run. These tests are unconscious attempts to protect yourself, but they often create the very abandonment you're trying to avoid. Your fear also makes you incredibly sensitive to any sign of disloyalty, even imagined ones. If someone doesn't text you back quickly, you might wonder if they're losing interest. If a friend makes plans without including you, you question their commitment to the friendship. If your partner glances at someone attractive, you see potential infidelity. Your radar for betrayal is so sensitive that it picks up false signals constantly. The most tragic part is that your fear of betrayal prevents you from experiencing the transformative power of true intimacy, the very thing your soul craves most. You want to be known completely and loved anyway, but you're too afraid to let anyone get close enough to really see you. So you end up feeling isolated even in relationships, known but not truly understood. But here's what you need to recognize. Your fear of betrayal is often more dangerous than actual betrayal. The walls you build to protect your heart also keep out the very love and connection that would heal it. Yes, vulnerability is risky. Yes, some people will hurt you, but the alternative, a life of emotional isolation, is far more painful than the occasional heartbreak. Start by practicing small vulnerabilities with people who have proven themselves trustworthy. Share something slightly uncomfortable. Express a need instead of pretending you don't have any. Ask for support instead of handling everything alone. Not everyone deserves access to your depths, but some people do, and they're waiting for you to let them in. Sagittarius. Your hidden fear is claustrophobia of the soul, the terror of being trapped, confined, or limited in any way that restricts your ability to explore, grow, and become whoever you're meant to be. This fear runs so deep that it affects every major decision you make, often in ways you don't even realize. You're the eternal explorer, the philosopher, the one always planning the next adventure. But what looks like wanderlust and curiosity to others is often driven by a panic response to anything that feels like a cage. Routine feels like death. Commitments feel like prisons. Even positive things like stable relationships or good jobs can trigger your flight response if they come with too many expectations or limitations. This fear makes you incredibly resistant to anything that requires you to be consistent or predictable. You change your mind frequently, not because you're flighty, but because new information might lead to new possibilities and you need to keep all your options open. Closing doors terrifies you, even when what's behind them isn't that great, because closed doors feel like trapped doors. In relationships, this fear shows up as commitment phobia, but it's more nuanced than that. You're not afraid of love, you're afraid of love that comes with chains.
You need partners who understand that loving you means giving you space to be yourself, even when that self is constantly evolving. The moment someone tries to pin you down or limit your growth, your instinct is to run. But here's where this fear becomes self-sabotaging. Your need for freedom is so intense that you sometimes reject good opportunities just because they require commitment. You quit jobs right before promotions because more responsibility feels like more chains. You end relationships when they start getting serious because serious feels permanent and permanent feels like death. You also struggle with depth in favor of breadth. You'd rather know a little about everything than everything about something, not because you lack intelligence or focus, but because specializing feels like limiting your options. You collect experiences, ideas, and connections, but you sometimes struggle to develop any of them fully because that would mean saying no to other possibilities. The irony is that your fear of being trapped actually traps you in a pattern of superficiality and restlessness. You're so busy keeping your options open that you never fully explore any of them. You're so afraid of commitment that you miss out on the deeper satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful over time. The truth is, real freedom doesn't come from avoiding all limitations. It comes from choosing your limitations consciously. The right relationship doesn't trap you, it gives you a secure base from which to explore. The right career doesn't limit you, it provides a framework within which your creativity can flourish. Sometimes boundaries aren't walls, they're foundations. Capricorn, let's talk about the fear that's been driving your relentless ambition and need for control since you were old enough to understand that the world can be chaotic and unfair. The bone-deep terror of failing, of losing control, of being seen as weak or incapable when you've built your entire identity around being strong and reliable. You're the achiever, the mountain climber, the one who sets goals and crushes them. But under all that success and determination is someone who's terrified of what would happen if you ever stopped climbing, ever stopped achieving, ever stopped proving your worth through your accomplishments. This fear makes you incredibly hard on yourself. Your internal standards are impossibly high because failure isn't just disappointing, it's devastating. It's not just about the specific goal you didn't meet, it's about what that failure says about you as a person. If you're not successful, if you're not in control, if you're not the person others can depend on, then who are you? You plan obsessively because surprises feel dangerous. You work harder than everyone else because half effort feels like an invitation to failure. You take on more responsibility than you should because delegation feels like losing control, and losing control feels like chaos. You'd rather be overwhelmed and in charge than relaxed and dependent on others. This fear shows up in your relationships as difficulty being vulnerable or asking for help. You're the rock everyone else leans on, but when you need support, you struggle to reach out. Needing help feels like admitting weakness, and weakness feels incompatible with your identity. So you suffer in silence, handling everything alone, carrying burdens that would be lighter if shared. You also struggle with perfectionism, but it's not the same as Virgo's perfectionism. For Virgo, perfectionism is about being good enough. For you, perfectionism is about being unassailable. If everything you do is flawless, no one can criticize you, which means no one can make you feel like a failure. But here's the cruel irony. Your fear of failure often prevents you from taking the risks that would lead to your greatest successes. You play it safe, stick to what you know you can do well, avoid ventures that might not work out. This keeps you successful in a narrow sense, but it also keeps you from discovering what you might be capable of if you weren't so afraid of falling. The most heartbreaking part is that your fear of losing control actually makes you less in control. When you're terrified of any sign of weakness or uncertainty, you become rigid, and rigid things break more easily than flexible things. Your need to control everything exhausts you and often pushes away the very people whose support would actually give you more strength. Here's what you need to understand. Real strength isn't about never failing or never needing help. Real strength is about recovering from failure, learning from it, and asking for support when you need it. Your worth isn't dependent on your achievements, though I know that's hard for you to believe. You are valuable because you are, not because of what you do.
Aquarius, this might be difficult to hear, but your hidden fear is emotional intimacy, not the intellectual connection you crave, not the friendship and camaraderie you excel at, but the messy, irrational, vulnerable emotional intimacy that requires you to feel deeply and let others see those feelings. You're the humanitarian, the revolutionary, the one who cares about everyone and fights for the underdog. You have incredible empathy for humanity as a whole, but when it comes to individual emotional connections, you often feel like you're observing from the outside, analyzing rather than experiencing. This fear stems from your deep need for intellectual freedom and emotional independence. Intense emotions feel chaotic, unpredictable, and potentially overwhelming. They threaten your carefully maintained objectivity and your sense of being above the petty dramas that consume other people. But this emotional detachment, while protective, also keeps you isolated in ways you might not even realize. In relationships, you're fantastic at being a friend, supportive, interesting, loyal in your own way. But when things start getting emotionally intense, when someone needs you to meet them in their pain or share your own vulnerability, you tend to intellectualize the situation instead of feeling it. You offer solutions when they want empathy, analysis when they want presence. You might think you're being helpful by staying rational and objective, but what your loved ones experience is emotional unavailability. They feel like they can access your mind, but not your heart, like you care about them in theory, but struggle to connect with them emotionally in practice. This fear also makes you uncomfortable with your own emotions. When you feel something strongly, anger, sadness, jealousy, overwhelming love, your instinct is to step back and analyze it rather than experience it. You ask yourself why you're feeling this way instead of allowing yourself to simply feel it. You treat your emotions like interesting phenomena to be studied rather than valid experiences to be honored. The irony is that your fear of emotional intimacy often prevents you from having the deep, meaningful connections that would actually support your mission to help humanity. You can't truly understand people's struggles if you won't let yourself feel deeply. You can't create real change if you're not willing to be changed yourself. But here's what's beautiful about Aquarius energy. When you do allow yourself to feel and connect emotionally, you bring a unique perspective that's incredibly healing for others. Your ability to see the bigger picture combined with genuine emotional presence is a rare and powerful combination. You just have to be willing to dive into the messiness of human emotion instead of floating above it. Start practicing emotional presence in small doses. When someone shares something difficult with you, resist the urge to immediately offer solutions. Just be with them in their feeling. When you experience strong emotions yourself, try sitting with them for a few minutes before analyzing them. Trust that your intellectual gifts won't disappear if you add emotional depth to them. Pisces, we end with your fear, and it might be the most complex one of all. You're terrified of reality, specifically the harsh, ugly, disappointing parts of reality that shatter your beautiful vision of how things could be, should be, and would be in a perfect world. You're the dreamer, the empath, the one who sees magic and possibility everywhere. Your imagination is your superpower, your compassion is unlimited, and your ability to envision a better world is extraordinary. But this same gift becomes a burden when reality consistently fails to match your dreams, when people disappoint you, when the world reveals its cruelty and injustice in ways that break your tender heart. This fear makes you incredibly skilled at avoidance. When reality gets too harsh, you escape into fantasy, into art, into relationships, into substances, into sleep, into illness, into whatever will take you away from the painful truth of what is. You're not lazy or weak, you're protecting your sensitive soul from a world that often feels too brutal to bear. But your escapes, while understandable, often make your problems worse. You avoid difficult conversations until relationships explode. You procrastinate on practical responsibilities until they become crises. You ignore warning signs in people and situations because acknowledging them would mean accepting that your hopes were misplaced. You fall in love with potential rather than reality, and then feel betrayed when people turn out to be human rather than perfect. The most painful part is that your fear of harsh reality often prevents you from developing the practical skills you need to navigate the world effectively.
You might struggle with money management, time management, or decision-making because these things require dealing with limitations, constraints, and uncomfortable truths. But you need to understand that your sensitivity isn't a flaw to overcome. The world needs people who dream of better things, who refuse to accept that cruelty and injustice are inevitable. But you can't change what you won't acknowledge. Your dreams have the power to transform reality, but only if you're willing to start with reality as it actually is. The key is learning to hold both your vision and the current truth at the same time. Yes, people can be cruel, but they can also be kind. Yes, the world has problems, but it also has beauty. Yes, your dreams might not come true exactly as you imagine them, but they might come true in ways that are even better than you expected. Those were the 12 hidden fears shaping your life. Now that you can see them, they've already lost some of their power. Fear was never the truth. It was just protection that stayed too long. The moment you shine a light on it, you take back control. Your fears don't have to disappear completely, but they no longer get to run the show. You do.